Coming up on Network Africa. Calm restored in Libya's capital Tripoli after rival gunmen exchanged fire following the killing of powerful militia leader Abdel al-Kikli. Dozens of white South Africans arrive in U.S. under President Donald Trump's refugee plan. South African leaders dispute the qualification of refugees for the first group of Afrikaners. Plus, Ghanaian Foreign Minister Samuel Ablakwa holds talks with his UAE counterpart, Abdullah bin Zayed, on bilateral relations. Hello and welcome to the program today. Thank you so much for joining us at this time. I'm Layo Olandi. We begin in Libya, where calm is said to have returned to the capital city of Tripoli after a day of clashes as rival gunmen exchanged fire in the city's southern districts. This followed the killing of a powerful militia leader, Abdel Ghani al-Kikli, widely known as Ghaniwa, head of the powerful Stability Support Authority militia. Authorities have imposed an emergency lockdown in the city, even as the United Nations is calling for urgent de-escalation. The appeal early on Tuesday came as residents reported hearing heavy gunfire and explosions across multiple neighborhoods from about 9 p.m. local time on Monday. Security sources have confirmed the killing of Ghaniwa, who was one of the capital's most influential militia leaders and had recently been involved in disputes with rival armed groups, including factions linked to Misrata. South Africa's Ministry of International Relations and Cooperation says the resettlement of South Africans in the United States as refugees is entirely politically motivated and designed to question South Africa's constitutional democracy. A group of white Afrikaners from South Africa arrived in the United States on Monday as part of a refugee program set up by the administration of President Donald Trump to offer sanctuary from what the president has depicted as racial discrimination against white people. The group, made of 23 families, over 50 individuals, have been granted refugee status under a relocation program announced by the Trump administration in February. The group of Afrikaners arrived at Dulles International Airport outside Washington, D.C. on a private charter plane and were greeted by Deputy Secretary of State Christopher Landau and Homeland Security Deputy Secretary Troy Edgar.
Deputy Secretary and I just spoke to some of the folks who arrived on this flight, and they tell quite harrowing stories of the violence that they faced in South Africa that was not redressed by the authorities, by the unjust application of the law. The United States, as we were proud to say, stands for equal justice under law and the fair and impartial application of the law. And again, this is a group that has not experienced that and has, to the contrary, experienced violence and really fear for their lives in South Africa. They were really subject to very serious, egregious, and targeted threats. And we wish them well in their journey to the United States.
And this has been a very important day. It was great to greet these folks that came in, to hear their stories, to hear what they've been through. This is a real situation. These people have went through a lot of stuff, and we're just grateful to have them in the U.S.
Well, let's take our next report that is showing us the inside of South Africa's exclusive Afrikaner-only settlement, even as President Donald Trump offers asylum to the community members.
3 decades ago, a group of white Afrikaners was opposed to majority black rule when apartheid ended, that they carved out separatist enclaves. The only town in South Africa where all residents, including menial workers, are white. The most prominent towns associated with Afrikaners are Orania, Clairefontaine, both established as Afrikaner-only settlements after the end of apartheid. Residents of the Afrikaner-only enclave of Clairefontaine now defend their settlement's cultural exclusivity amid renewed criticism and international attention following a 2025 executive order by U.S. President Donald Trump offering asylum to white Afrikaners. Spokesperson Danny De Beer said the settlement was created to protect Afrikaner heritage and identity after the end of apartheid.
Clairefontaine started in 1992. We're about 900 hectares big. We have 9 pieces of property that all belong to the company. And you as a resident, you become a member of the company, and then you have right on that piece of ground. Today we're around about 1,500 people. So it's almost like we are being singled out and we are being punished for being Afrikaners and for protecting our heritage and our culture.
Critics say Clairefontaine's policies mirror segregationist practices from the apartheid era, which ended in 1994. Under apartheid, the white minority government implemented laws that excluded the black majority from land ownership, political participation, and economic opportunities. The community has faced legal and political pressure over the years, but maintains that its model is legal under South African law.
We do work together.
Board chairperson Rian Genus said the community evaluates all potential residents based on their alignment with Afrikaner cultural principles.
So if a black family were to want to live here, we would look at that family as a whole. Remember, they need to comply to the basic principles of the Afrikaner culture. We're not so much worried about the black family as we are about Afrikaner culture. And if they do not comply with that, there is no chance that they will be invited to come and live here.
President Trump's executive order in February 2025 cited alleged violence against white farmers and South Africa's land expropriation policies as grounds for offering Afrikaners refuge status in the United States. However, South African authorities have repeatedly disputed allegations of persecution and discrimination against the white minority group. South Africa's constitution protects cultural rights, but legal experts have argued that exclusive communities like Clairefontaine test the boundaries of non-discrimination provisions.
Well, let's discuss this further. Joining us now on the program is Ernest Van Zyl. He's a member of AfriForum, a South African NGO focused on the interest of Afrikaners. And we also have joining us Dr. Malusi Nkube, a political analyst and lecturer on South Africa-US Relations Studies at the University of Johannesburg. Thank you, gentlemen, for speaking to us on Network Africa.
Good afternoon. I hope we can have a fruitful and productive conversation.
And my first question is to you, Ernest. What is the justification of the Afrikaners group that's known to be an economically privileged group in South Africa for relocating to the US as a refugee? And I mean, a refugee is defined to be a person who has been forced to leave their country in order to escape war, persecution, or natural disaster.
Well, in the first place, I think just painting all Afrikaners with a broad brush as privileged or as wealthy, I think is a gross oversimplification of the situation. Many Afrikaners in South Africa are impoverished. Many Afrikaners in South Africa do not live luxurious lives. But at the same time, this is a cultural community in South Africa, within the white minority in South Africa, that is targeted by race laws, being discriminated against by the government. And there's high-profile politicians in South Africa chanting chants like "kill the boer, kill the farmer," directed at the white minority and farmers. So I think there's genuine cause for concern. Their concerns are legitimate, and that's not even talking about the other issues like the Expropriation Act, that is a direct threat to private property rights of all South Africans, with a particular nasty focus on this whole idea of there has to be a restoration, a justice, a land justice needs to be made, but there's always a racial element to it, meaning that there's obviously then going to be a racial element in how this type of legislation is applied. So the white minority in South Africa, Afrikaners being part of that minority, is definitely being targeted by laws by the government. The South African government has over 142 race laws on the books, and it's a reality, and I think it's a serious reality that deserves the recognition that it is getting in 2025.
Well, Malusi, do you agree with this, what Ernest has just said? Dr. Malusi, if you can hear me, and I believe you heard Ernest's response to my question, do you agree with this, or that we're painting the same brush on Afrikaners as being, all Afrikaners living a luxurious life?
I didn't hear him. The sound quality is very, very bad. It's very, very bad. I can't even hear you properly.
Oh, I do apologize for that. But very quickly, let me move to Ernest while we try to get your audio better. Ernest, I want to talk about U.S. President Donald Trump's recent comments. We've heard him speak to reporters at the White House, and this was on Monday, that Afrikaners were victims of a genocide. President Trump's use of the term genocide, quite a heavy word. Well, how would you assess the implications of this in relation to the global perception of South Africa, knowing the country's history?
Well, from AfriForum's side, we are one of the forefront organizations that have been bringing attention to the scourge of farm murders and farm attacks in South Africa, a brutal violent crime phenomenon that has unfortunately led to the deaths of thousands of farmers over the decades, and also a violent crime phenomenon that is romanticized and encouraged by high-profile politicians in South Africa through chants like kill the boer, kill the farmer, and then also by just the government's total silence on the condemning such chants and incitement of violence against minorities and farmers. In particular, Donald Trump's spotlight that he is shining on this issue. AfriForum is very glad that finally a very large global power is shining a light on this serious issue. In AfriForum's assessment, farm murders are not a genocide, but at the same time, that really raises the question, does a violent crime phenomenon as serious as this really have to be a genocide for people to care about it? I don't think so. So in the regards to particularly AfriForum's stance, farm murders are an incredibly serious issue in South Africa. It is a violent crime phenomenon that's often accompanied by seriously high levels of torture, and often the victims being murdered without anything being stolen. And at the same time, there's this political element of politicians encouraging this violent crime. So it is serious, and AfriForum is very glad that politicians, global powers, and one of the most powerful men in the world, Donald Trump, is shining a light on this very serious issue. It is very welcome.
Dr. Malusi Nkumbe, I'm hoping you can hear me this time. I want to ask your opinion of South Africa's international image in light of, these, because this particular issue has raised questions from refugee advocates since the Trump administration, had suspended efforts to resettle people and who are fleeing the war, but have now agreed and indeed received some white South Africans to the U.S. under a refugee status. How does this play out for South Africa's international image?
Can I respond?
Yes, you can.
Thank you so much. I'm so sorry to the viewers and listeners. The sound is pretty bad, but I hope you'll hear my response.
We can hear you, and you can go ahead.
And I did not hear fully his response, but I heard him trying to justify that it's not genocide. But basically, America is a very ruthless state, especially given the geopolitical shifts that are going on in now. They're trying certainly what they've done, they're trying to have a permanent foot into South Africa's internal affairs, and they've done it with what a gift they've been handed in by AfriForum, that is the ostensible genocide that is taking place in South Africa. There's nothing like genocide that is taking place. Yes, there is crime amongst all peoples of South Africa that are murdered in very ugly ways, be they Afrikaner, be they Black Africans, be they Indians, or be they colored. And the law does take its course. But given that now we are in a multipolar world, and America and AfriForum gives the American government, and particularly of their president. Remember the other time they just announced in the public.
Afraid we'll have to leave the conversation at there, the audio being quite bad, but we do apologize to our viewers. Mr. Ernest Van Zyl, we are due for a break at this point, but we'd like to thank you, member of AfriForum, and Dr. Malusi Nkumbe, political analyst in Johannesburg. Thank you both for your time on our program.
Goodbye. Have a nice day.
We'll take a break now on the program, still to come. Presidents of South Africa and Rwanda, Paul Kagame and Cyril Ramaphosa, urge African self-reliance amid tensions and tariffs at the Africa CEO Forum. Welcome back to the program. Ghana's Foreign Minister Samuel Ablakwa has met with his UAE counterpart, Foreign Minister Sheikh Abdullah Al Nahyan, in the capital Abu Dhabi. Their meeting included a discussion on bilateral relations and ways to strengthen them to serve the mutual interests of both Ghana and the United Arab Emirates, and also to benefit the citizens. Both leaders also reviewed opportunities to expand cooperation across several key sectors, including economic, trade, investment, and energy fields. African leaders Paul Kagame and Cyril Ramaphosa are calling for greater continental self-reliance, responding to both international aid cuts and persistent regional conflicts with a shared message: Africa must take control of its own future. Speaking in Abidjan on Monday at the Africa CEO Forum this week, Rwandan President Paul Kagame referenced U.S. President Donald Trump's recent aid reductions and tariff hikes, suggesting the moves should serve as a wake-up call for the continent. While Mr. Kagame stressed economic independence, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa turned the spotlight on regional peacekeeping efforts, particularly in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, where fighting has displaced hundreds of thousands and left over 7,000 dead this year alone. Mr. Ramaphosa praised African-led mediation efforts like the Luanda and Nairobi processes and said the African Union has laid a critical foundation for lasting peace.
If you look at what we've been doing on our continent, much progress has been made. I think we can't say nothing has been done, generally. Whether it was to do with the reforms, and I think Africans have come together. They have defined things and they speak with one voice. Increasingly, there is significant progress. But most of these developments that have been happening in the last decade, as I said, are reminders that there are things we need to do that we haven't done. So if you look at it at the African Union level, I remember when I was the champion of the reform process, there are things that were discussed on the continent. For example, the peace and security facility that was put in place. Because it was put in place to avoid being fully dependent on external funders, because that has been the case. In fact, this is similar to what happens in other areas in different countries.
On the peace process, particularly in the conflict that's been happening on our continent and particularly in the Eastern DRC, I'd like to compliment rather than contradict what President Kagame is saying. The processes that have been happening on the continent, either the Nairobi process or the Luanda process or the AU process, have been very, very essential in building a foundation of peacemaking and also confidence building, up to and including agreements that have been reached for a ceasefire between the belligerents, up to and including the withdrawal of, say, the SADC forces as they are withdrawing now. I mean, people may think that President Kagame and I are in conflict, and some of you may have thought that there's going to be fireworks as we're sitting close to each other.
In South Sudan, the United Nations World Food Programme and UN Children's Agency UNICEF is warning that more than 60,000 malnourished children in Upper Nile State are at risk of plunging deeper into malnutrition, even as treatment supplies are running critically low and resupply efforts are hampered. Intensified fighting along the White Nile River has hindered humanitarian supplies in almost a month, as the river is the main humanitarian supply corridor into Upper Nile. As the rainy season progresses and conflict continues to displace families, the spread of waterborne diseases and increased food insecurity is expected to contribute to a rise in the number of malnourished children. Without urgent access and resupply of vital assistance, WFP and UNICEF say they expect to exhaust nutrition supplies to treat moderate and severe cases of malnutrition by the end of May.
Been to State Hospital this morning and I've had the chance to visit the nutrition activities here. I visited the inpatient stabilization center, and I've also had the chance to visit the outpatient system that exists here to treat children who are identified as being at risk of severe and acute malnutrition, or who have been identified as having severe and acute malnutrition. The little ones who I met this morning, they were identified in time. They were able to come to the stabilization center even though they were very sick. We heard stories of vomiting, of diarrhea, of intestinal worms, of inability to latch on and breastfeed. And we heard so many stories about children who were really suffering. And if they hadn't got treatment, if they hadn't got the right counseling, if they hadn't got the right support, if they hadn't had that therapeutic feed, if they hadn't had that ready-to-use therapeutic foods, they may not have made it.
Finally, on the program, the chairman, CEO, Nigerians in Diaspora Commission, NIDCOM, Dr. Abike Dabiri-Erewa, has commended 12-year-old Amazing Grace Salami, winner of the inaugural Spelling Bee in Nigeria, Spain, even as she is set to represent Nigeria at the 100th edition of the Scripps National Spelling Bee in Washington, D.C. Mrs. Dabiri-Erewa describes Ms. Salami's achievement as a source of national pride, especially because her feat marks the nation's debut in the prestigious competition. Emphasizing the significance of Nigeria's participation in the global event, Ms. Dabiri-Erewa noted that Nigeria and Ghana are the only African countries to ever participate since its establishment about a century ago. The NIDCOM boss reaffirmed the Commission's commitment to supporting initiatives that empower Nigerian youths and enhance the country's global presence through excellence and innovation. During the courtesy visit to NIDCOM headquarters in Abuja, Ms. Salami shared her excitement about the upcoming competition and the opportunity to interact with peers from around the world. She also expressed gratitude for the support received and pledged to represent Nigeria with excellence on the international stage. We do wish her all the best. That's it on the program for today. Thank you for watching. I'm Layo Olarinde.